The Galactic Council convenes. The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, and the ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath its crystalline dome. It was the largest structure ever built by any civilization in known space, and today it held representatives from 847 spacefaring species who had gathered to witness something that happened only once every few centuries: the formal introduction of a new member species to Galactic Civilization Ambassador. Velith Sauron of the Kethrani Collective stood at her designated position among the senior diplomatic corps, her 4 eyes fixed on the central platform where the newcomers would soon appear. Her species had been part of the council for 10,000 years, and in that time she had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, and the introduction of hundreds of new species to the galactic community. None of them had ever made her feel what she felt now. The Kethrani were a patient people, long-lived and slow to judge, and Velith had earned her position through centuries of careful observation and analysis. She did not form opinions quickly, and she did not experience strong emotions without good reason. But for the past several months, ever since she had begun studying the newest candidate species, she had felt something stirring in her chest that she barely recognized: fear. The great doors at the far end of the chamber slid open, and the human delegation entered. There were 12 of them, walking in a neat formation, wearing simple dark clothing that seemed almost primitive compared to the elaborate garments of most council species. They were small creatures, barely taller than the Kethrani themselves, with soft skin in various shades of brown and pink, and they moved with a strange fluid grace that Velith found unsettling. The leader of the delegation was a female named Sarah Martinez, and she walked with her head held high and a gentle smile on her face. Beside her was a male named David Chun, who would serve as the permanent human ambassador to the council, and he too was smiling, his dark eyes warm and friendly as he looked around the vast chamber. They seemed so harmless. The High Speaker of the Council, an ancient being from the crystalline Vothan species, rose from his throne and spread his arms in the traditional gesture of welcome. "We gather today to welcome a new voice to our great assembly," he announced. His words translated instantly into the languages of all present. "The species known as humans, from the planet called Earth, has achieved the requirements for membership in our community. They have developed faster than light travel. They have established peaceful contact with existing member species, and they have demonstrated a commitment to cooperation and mutual benefit." A ripple of polite acknowledgement passed through the chamber, though Velith noticed that many species regarded the humans with barely concealed condescension. The Torvex delegation, massive beings covered in armored plates, leaned toward each other and made gestures that clearly communicated amusement. The Silinari, ethereal creatures of light and energy, flickered in patterns that suggested mild curiosity mixed with dismissal. Humans had been spacefaring for only 200 years. To most of the species present, they were infants. Barely worthy of notice, Sarah Martinez stepped forward and bowed respectfully to the High Speaker. "We are honored beyond words to stand before this assembly," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Humanity has dreamed of reaching the stars since we first looked up at the night sky, and to find ourselves welcomed into such a vast and wonderful community fills us with joy and gratitude." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many species as she could. "We come to you as friends and students," she continued. "We know that we are young, and we have much to learn from the wisdom of those who have traveled among the stars for far longer than we have. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of the trust you place in us today." It was a humble speech, well-crafted and diplomatic, and it earned a murmur of approval from many in the chamber. The humans were saying exactly what a young species should say. Showing proper respect and deference to their elders, Valeth watched them carefully. And she did not relax. She had spent the past year studying everything the Council's intelligence networks had gathered about humanity. She had read their history, their literature, their scientific journals, and their news reports. She had watched recordings of their art and their entertainment. She had analyzed their social structures, their political systems, their religious beliefs, and what she had found terrified her. Other species saw a young civilization that had clawed its way up from a harsh world. A species that had developed technology and built cities and eventually reached for the stars. They saw nothing unusual in this, because many species had similar histories. But Valeth saw something different. She saw a species that had spent its entire existence at war with itself. She saw nations that had risen and fallen in orgies of violence that made the Torvek's conquests look like minor disagreements. She saw weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. And she saw that the humans had actually used such weapons against their own kind. She saw a species that had hunted dozens of other species on their world into extinction. Not for food or resources, but sometimes simply for sport. She saw a species that had developed torture into an art form, that had built empires on the backs of slaves, that had committed atrocities against their own people for reasons of religion or politics or simple hatred, and yet here they stood, smiling and offering handshakes and speaking of peace and cooperation. The ceremony continued, with various council members offering formal words of welcome, and the humans accepted everything with grace and humility. David Chun shook hands with representative after representative, his grip firm but gentle, his smile never wavering. Valeth watched him closely. There was something in his eyes, something hidden behind the warmth and friendliness, something old and patient and incredibly dangerous. It was the look of a predator that had chosen, for reasons of its own, to walk among prey without hunting. The other species could not see it. They had never lived on a death world, never fought for survival against an environment that seemed determined to kill them. They had evolved on gentle planets with stable climates and abundant resources. And they had risen to civilization through cooperation and gradual development. The humans had not. Humans had earned every inch of their progress through blood and fire and suffering. And they carried that history in their bones. Every smile was a choice. Every handshake was a choice. Every word of peace was a deliberate decision to be something other than what their nature demanded. Valeth knew this because she had seen the alternative. She had watched recordings of human soldiers charging into hopeless battles, screaming and laughing as they died. She had seen humans lift impossible weights to save loved ones from danger. She had seen humans survive injuries that should have killed them 10 times over, kept alive by nothing but rage and determination. And she had seen what happened when humans stopped smiling. The ceremony ended, and the human delegation was escorted to their new quarters in the diplomatic sector. Valeth watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. The council believed they had welcomed a harmless young species into their midst. Valeth knew better. She knew that the galaxy had just changed forever, and most of its inhabitants had no idea what was coming. The incident at Proxima Station. 18 months passed, and humanity slowly began to find its place in the galactic community. Human traders appeared in alien markets. Human scientists joined research projects across dozens of worlds. And human diplomats worked tirelessly to build relationships with species that had been traveling among the stars when humanity was still learning to make. Fire Ambassador Valeth watched it all with growing unease. The humans were doing everything right. They were polite and humble and eager to learn. They respected local customs and laws. They contributed to joint projects without trying to take control. They asked for help when they needed it, and offered help when they could, and yet, Velith could not shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. The trouble began in the Proxima Centauri system, where a joint human-alien research station orbited a rocky moon. The station was home to 340 humans and about 200 scientists from various other species, all working together on a project to study the strange energy fields that pulsed through the region. The Vorth Dominion had been watching. Vorth were an aggressive species that had built their empire through conquest and intimidation. They controlled nearly 100 star systems, and they had a simple philosophy: the strong took what they wanted, and the weak either submitted or died. They had noticed that humanity's territory bordered their own, and they had decided to send a message. 12 Vorth warships dropped out of hyperspace near the research station, their weapons already powered and their shields at full strength. The fleet commander, a massive warrior named Krathel, broadcast a simple demand to the station: surrender immediately, or be destroyed. The alien scientists on the station immediately began preparing evacuation pods, ready to flee as most species would when faced with such overwhelming force. The Vorth had done this many times before, and they expected the humans to surrender within minutes. The humans did not surrender. Station Commander James Morrison, a former military officer with gray hair and calm blue eyes, responded to the Vorth demand with a single word. Krathel was confused. He had studied the humans, and he knew they had no military vessels in the system. They had no heavy weapons on the station. They had no reinforcements within days of travel. By any reasonable calculation, resistance was suicide. He gave them 1 hour to reconsider. Commander Morrison used that hour well. He evacuated all the alien scientists, putting them on fast shuttles that raced away from the station while the Vorth fleet watched in amusement. Then he gathered the 340 humans in the main cargo bay and gave them a choice. Anyone who wanted to leave could go, and no one would think less of them. Not a single human left when the hour ended. The Vorth fleet opened fire. The station's shields held for about 30 minutes before failing, and then the real battle began. Vorth boarding parties cut through the hull and poured into the corridors, expecting to find terrified scientists cowering in corners, waiting to be captured. Instead, they found hell. The humans had spent the hour turning the station into a death trap. They had rigged mining equipment to explode. They had converted welding tools into weapons. They had filled corridors with debris and created choke points where small groups could hold off larger forces. They had removed panels from walls to create hiding spots, and they had memorized every vent and access tunnel in the entire structure. The Vorth soldiers were elite warriors, trained from birth for combat, equipped with the finest weapons their empire could produce. Each one was nearly 8 feet tall and covered in thick scales that could stop most small arms fire. The humans killed them anyway. They fought in ways the Vorth had never seen. They attacked from the shadows and disappeared before anyone could react. They set traps that killed dozens at a time. They used the station's systems against the invaders, venting atmosphere and overloading power conduits and sending walls of flame through corridors when their improvised weapons ran out of ammunition. They fought with tools and pipes and bare hands. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the battle stretched from hours into days. The Vorth fleet kept sending more soldiers, and the humans kept killing them. The station became a graveyard of twisted metal and floating bodies. And still the humans refused to give up. On the third day, a group of humans, led by a young engineer named Maria Santos, boarded one of the Vorth ships through a damaged airlock. They were outnumbered 50 to 1. They had no armor and almost no weapons, and they captured the ship in less than an hour. They used it to ram another Vorth vessel by the 5th day. The Vorth had lost 2 more ships to similar attacks, and their ground forces had suffered casualties that would have broken any other species. Krathel could not understand what he was seeing. These soft, fragile creatures should have been crushed in the first assault. But instead, they were tearing his fleet apart piece by piece on the seventh day. He received reports that the humans were fighting in sections of the station that had been exposed to vacuum. They were holding their breath, sealing their wounds with spray foam, and continuing to fight in conditions that should have killed them instantly on the ninth day. Human reinforcements finally arrived, a small fleet of civilian ships that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons could be found. They were hopelessly outmatched by the remaining Vorth warships. But they attacked without hesitation. The humans on the station heard the news and launched a final assault, throwing everything they had left at the Vorth boarding parties. They fought with broken bones and missing limbs. They fought when they could barely stand. They fought with a fury that made the Vorth, a species bred for war retreat, in terror on the 11th day. The last Vorth ship fled the system, leaving behind 3 destroyed vessels, 2 crippled beyond repair, and nearly 4,000 dead soldiers. 112 humans survived. The galaxy watched the aftermath footage in horrified fascination. They saw humans carrying wounded comrades through ruined corridors. They saw makeshift medical bays where surgeons operated with tools meant for repairing machines. They saw a young woman with one arm missing, calmly helping to evacuate the wounded while refusing treatment for herself. And they saw Commander Morrison, standing in the shattered remains of the command center, his uniform soaked in blood that was both his own and not his own, calmly coordinating the rescue efforts as if nothing unusual had happened. Ambassador Valith watched the footage from her quarters on the council station, her 4 eyes fixed on the screen, her heart's pounding with a mixture of awe and dread. She had known what humans were capable of, but knowing and seeing were very different things. And the worst part, the thing that kept her awake for many nights afterward, was a small detail that most observers missed throughout the entire 11-day battle. In all the footage from all the cameras, she never once saw a human lose control. They fought with incredible ferocity. They took terrible risks. They did things that should have been impossible, but they never stopped thinking, never stopped planning, never gave in to blind rage. They had been fighting at perhaps 10% of their true capacity. The thought made Velas' blood run cold, because if this was what humans could do while holding back, what would happen if they ever truly let go? The weight of restraint. The council chamber erupted into chaos after the Proxima incident, with species arguing about what to do with both the Vorth and the humans. Some called for sanctions against the Vorth Dominion, while others demanded that humanity be expelled from the council before they could cause more trouble. There were accusations and counter-accusations, threats and promises. And through it all, the human delegation sat quietly in their seats, smiling and waiting for their turn to speak. Ambassador Valith did not participate in the debates. She had more important things to do. 3 weeks after the battle ended, she sent a private message to Ambassador David Chun, requesting a meeting in her personal quarters. He accepted immediately, and 2 days later he arrived at her door with a bottle of something he called wine, and that same gentle smile she had seen on the day of his arrival. Ambassador Sauron, he said warmly, "Thank you for the invitation. I have been hoping for a chance to speak with you privately." Violet gestured for him to enter, and he walked into her quarters with the easy confidence of someone who feared nothing in the universe. She watched him closely, searching for any sign of the warrior she had seen in the battle footage. But all she could see was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a soft voice. They sat across from each other in comfortable chairs, and David poured 2 glasses of the wine, a deep red liquid that smelled of fruit and earth. Violet took a small sip and found it surprisingly pleasant, though she suspected the alcohol would have no effect on her Kethrani physiology. "You have questions," David said. And it was not a question. "I have many questions," Violet replied. "But I will start with the most important one. Why do your people smile so much? David raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the question. I mean, no offense. Valeth continued, but I have studied your history. I have read about your wars and your atrocities. I have seen what your species has done to each other and to other creatures on your world. And yet, whenever I meet humans, they are friendly and warm and eager to please. Why do you pretend to be something you are not? David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass of wine, and Valeth wondered if she had offended him. But when he looked up, his expression was not angry, it was sad. You are the first person from any species to ask me that question, he said softly, and I thank you for your honesty. Most beings look at us and see only what we show them. They do not look deeper. They do not ask why. He set down his glass and leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his eyes meeting Valeth's with an intensity that made her want to look away. Humans are not peaceful by nature, he said. We did not evolve for cooperation. We evolved to survive on a world that was trying to kill us every single day. We were prey before we were predators, and we never forgot the fear of being hunted. That fear became anger, and that anger became something else, something that made us the most dangerous creatures on our planet. Valeth nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. Our ancestors hunted animals 10 times their size, David said. They did not do this with strength or speed, because they had neither. They did it with patience and endurance and a willingness to keep going long after any sane creature would have stopped. They would chase prey for days, never giving up, never resting, until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. And then they would eat it. He paused and took another sip of wine. That is what we are at our core, he continued. We are persistence hunters. We are the monsters that never stop coming. We are the creatures that other creatures have nightmares about. And we carry that nature inside us still, buried beneath our smiles and our handshakes and our talk of peace. Then why do you hide it? Valeth asked, why pretend to be harmless when you clearly are not? David smiled, but there was no warmth in it now, only a deep and ancient weariness. Because we have seen what happens when we stop pretending, he said. We have seen what we become when we let the monster out. We have burned cities and salted fields. We have slaughtered millions for the crime of being different. We have built weapons that can crack the crust of a planet and release them on our own kind. And every time, every single time, we have looked at what we did and sworn to never let it happen again. He leaned back in his chair and spread his hands. Every human you meet is performing the greatest act of self-control in the galaxy, he said. Every smile is a choice. Every handshake is a choice. Every word of friendship is a deliberate decision to be something other than what our nature demands. We are not pretending to be harmless. We are actively working, every moment of every day, to become something better than what we were. Valeth felt something shift in her understanding of the species she had been studying for so long. She had seen them as dangerous predators wearing masks of civilization. But now she realized it was more complicated than that. You are afraid of yourselves, she said quietly. Terrified, David agreed. We have seen what we can do, and we know that the capacity for that destruction is still inside us. It never goes away. It just waits, patient and hungry, for the moment when we stop holding it back. And the Proxima incident? Valeth asked. The battle at the station, was that an example of humans losing control? David laughed, but it was not a happy sound. That was us holding back, he said. Those people on the station made a choice to fight rather than surrender. And they fought as hard as they could while still remaining human. They used strategy and planning and teamwork. They took care of each other even as they killed their enemies. They never gave in to the rage that was screaming inside them to simply destroy everything in their path. He looked at Valeth with eyes that suddenly seemed very old. You want to know what scares us more than anything in the universe? He asked. It is not the Vorath or any other enemy we might face. It is the thought that someday, somewhere, something will happen that pushes us past the breaking point. Something that makes us stop caring about being civilized. Something that unleashes the thing we have spent our entire history trying to contain. Valeth felt a chill run through her body, despite the warmth of the room. What happens then? She whispered. David Chun looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something that had been there all along. Hiding behind the warmth and kindness, something cold and patient, and utterly without mercy. Then we stop smiling, he said, and everything dies. They sat in silence for a long time after that. Two ambassadors from very different worlds, sharing a bottle of wine and contemplating the terrible truth that Valeth had finally come to. Understand, humanity was not a threat because they were. Violent humanity was a threat because they were trying so hard not to be. And all it would take was one moment, one tragedy, one unforgivable act to shatter that self-control fervor. Valeth poured another glass of wine with hands that trembled slightly. She had a feeling she was going to need it. The breaking point. 2 years passed after Valeth's conversation with David Chun, and the galaxy slowly forgot about the Proxima incident. There were other crises to deal with, other conflicts to resolve, and the humans faded into the background of galactic politics. Just another young species trying to find their way among the stars. The Varith Dominion did not forget Krathel. The fleet commander who had fled from Proxima Station was executed for his failure, and his replacement was a warrior named Zarveth, who was determined to avenge the humiliation his people had suffered. He spent 2 years studying the humans, learning their weaknesses. Planning his revenge, he concluded that the humans at Proxima had fought so hard because they had no choice. They were trapped on a station with nowhere to run, so they had been forced to stand and fight. If he attacked a target where the humans could flee, he believed they would run like all the other weak species the Vorith had conquered. He chose the human colony on Kepler 442b. The planet was home to 12 million humans, families with children, farmers and teachers and doctors, ordinary people living ordinary lives on a world far from the center of human civilization. They had almost no military forces, only a small defense fleet that was barely capable of dealing with. Pyretesserveth assembled a fleet of 50 warships and struck without warning. The attack was not a conquest, it was an extermination. Soldiers swept across the planet like a plague, burning cities and slaughtering everyone they found. They did not take prisoners. They did not accept surrender. They killed men, women, and children with equal enthusiasm. And they recorded everything to broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to any species that might think of resisting. Vorith expansion in 72 hours. Nearly 9 million humans were dead. The survivors huddled in bunkers and basements, listening to the screams of their neighbors and the thunder of Varith weapons, waiting for death to find them. The few ships that managed to escape carried images and recordings that were transmitted to every human colony and station in the galaxy. The Council received the footage as well, and representatives gathered in the Great Chamber to debate what should be done. Some called for intervention, while others argued that the Varith had a right to expand their territory. There were discussions about sanctions and diplomatic protests and strongly worded letters. Ambassador Valeth did not participate. She was watching the human delegation. They humans had received the news from Kepler 442b at the same time as everyone else, and their reaction had been strange. There was no shouting, no crying, no immediate demands for action. They had simply gone quiet, their faces becoming still and blank, their eyes losing the warmth that had always been present. David Chun sat in his chair without moving, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the walls of the chamber. His smile was gone, and in its place was an expression that Valeth had never seen on a human face before: nothing, complete and total emptiness. The Human delegation rose as one and walked out of the chamber without saying a word. They did not respond to questions or calls from other delegates. They simply left, moving with perfect synchronization like soldiers marching to war for 3 days. No humans spoke on any diplomatic channel anywhere in the galaxy. All human ships stopped moving. All human stations went dark. The galaxy waited, confused and increasingly frightened, as the silence stretched on and on. The 4th day, the human fleet mobilized. Valith watched the reports come in from across the galaxy, and she felt her heart freeze in her chest. This was not a defense fleet. This was not a strike force. This was everything, every ship, every weapon, every human capable of fighting, gathered into the largest military force the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. They were heading for Varith. Space Ambassador Valith tried to contact David Chun, but he did not respond. She tried to contact other members of the human delegation, but none of them would speak to her. She sent messages explaining that the council was working on a response, that there would be consequences for the Vorith, that humanity should give diplomacy a chance. The only reply she received was a single image, a photograph of a human child, no more than 5 years old, lying dead in the rubble of her home on Kepler-442 BVA-LITH. Did not try to contact them again. The human fleet entered Var space 2 weeks later. And what followed was not a war, it was an annihilation. The Varith had one of the most powerful militaries in the galaxy, with hundreds of warships and billions of soldiers. They had conquered dozens of species and held their empire through strength and fear. They believed they could crush the human fleet through sheer numbers. They were wrong. The humans did not fight like they had at Proxima Station. There was no strategy, no caution, no concern for their own survival. They attacked with a fury that defied description, throwing themselves at Varith defenses like a tide of fire and metal that could not be stopped. Human ships rammed Varith vessels at full speed, their crews choosing certain death to take enemy ships with them. Human soldiers charged fortified positions without hesitation, absorbing horrific casualties to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers. Human weapons poured destruction on Varith worlds without pause, without mercy, without end. They were smiling again, but these were not the warm, friendly smiles that Valith had seen before. These were the smiles of predators that had finally stopped pretending. These were the smiles of monsters that had been caged for thousands of years and were now free at last. The first Vorith world fell in 3 days. The second fell in 2. The third fell in Horsar. Vith, the architect of the massacre on Kepler-442b, broadcast desperate calls for surrender, promising to return territory, promising to pay reparations, promising anything the humans wanted if they would just stop. The humans did not respond. They simply kept coming. Species across the galaxy watched in horror as the Vorith, dominion and empire that had stood for 5,000 years, was systematically erased from existence. World after world went dark, their populations scattered or destroyed, their cities reduced to ash and rubble. Some Varith fled, abandoning their homes and their empire to escape the human advance. The humans hunted them down. Some Varith tried to hide, concealing themselves among other species or on remote worlds at the edge of known space. The humans found them. Some Varith begged for mercy, surrendering unconditionally and throwing themselves on the mercy of their conquerors. The humans looked at them with empty eyes and kept walking. In 6 months, the Vorith dominion was gone. 14 worlds, sterilized 80 billion Vorith, reduced to a scattered remnant of terrified refugees. And through it all, Ambassador Valith sat in her quarters, watching the reports and remembering what David Chun had told her 2 years ago. Then we stopped smiling, and everything dies. She had not believed him. She believed him now. The human fleet turned around and headed home, leaving behind nothing but silence and ash. They had not taken territory. They had not demanded reparations. They had not established bases or claimed resources. They had simply made the Vorth pay, and now the rest of the galaxy understood what humans were capable of when they stopped holding. That Valith looked at the latest casualty reports and felt something she had not experienced in centuries: despair, because she knew that this was only the beginning. The final warning. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Representatives from 846 species sat in their designated positions, their attention fixed on the central platform where the human delegation stood waiting to address the assembly. The seat that had once belonged to the Vorth Dominion sat empty, a silent reminder of what had happened to those who pushed humanity too far. 6 months had passed since the end of the war, and in that time, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Species that had once dismissed humans as harmless newcomers now treated them with careful respect. Trade agreements were renegotiated to favor human interests. Territorial disputes were resolved in humanity's favor without a single shot being fired. Fear had become the foundation of a new galactic order. Ambassador David Chun stepped forward, and the chamber fell even more silent. He looked the same as he had on the day of his arrival, middle-aged, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But now everyone in the room knew what lurked behind that pleasant exterior. Distinguished members of the council, he began, his voice calm and steady. We come before you today to express our deep regret for the events of the past year. What happened to the Vorth Dominion was a tragedy, and we take no pride in what we were forced to do. A murmur rippled through the chamber, and Valith saw confusion on many faces. The humans were apologizing? After what the Vorth had done to them. We wish to make clear that our actions were not a matter of choice, David continued. They were a matter of necessity. The Vorth attacked our people, murdered our children, and broadcast their crimes for the galaxy to see. They left us no option but to respond with overwhelming force. He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many species as he could. But we also wish to make clear that we do not want this to happen again, he said. We do not want to be the monsters that other species fear. We do not want to be the destroyers of civilizations. We want only to live in peace, to trade and explore and learn alongside our galactic neighbors. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. We ask only that you give us the chance to prove that we can be trusted, he concluded. We ask only that you treat us as friends, not as threats. And we promise, on behalf of all humanity, that we will do everything in our power to ensure that what happened to the Vorth never happens again. The chamber erupted into discussion as the human delegation returned to their seats. Some species seemed relieved by the speech, eager to accept the humans' offer of friendship and put the war behind them. Others were clearly skeptical, whispering about preemptive strikes and containment strategies. The High Speaker called for order and began recognizing delegates who wished to address the assembly. One by one, representatives stood and offered their opinions, some calling for reconciliation, others demanding that humanity be expelled from the council or subjected to military restrictions. Ambassador Valith listened to all of it, her four eyes moving from speaker to speaker, her mind racing with thoughts and fears and calculations. She had been preparing for this moment for months, working on a speech that she hoped would change the course of galactic history. When her name was finally called, she rose slowly and made her way to the central platform. Distinguished colleagues, she began, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. I have listened carefully to your words today and understand your concerns. The destruction of the Vorth Dominion has frightened many of you, and that fear has led some to call for action against humanity. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembly. I am here to tell you that such action would be the greatest mistake this council has ever made. Another murmur passed through the chamber, and Valith raised a hand for silence. I have studied humanity longer than any other member of this council, she continued. I have read their history, watched their behavior, and spoken with their representatives. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that you do not understand what you are dealing with. She turned and gestured toward the human delegation. Look at them, she said. They are smiling again. They are offering handshakes and speaking of peace. They seem harmless, even friendly. And that is exactly what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The humans did not react to her words. They simply sat quietly, their expressions calm and patient. What you see before you is not the true face of humanity, Velis said. What you see is a mask, a carefully constructed illusion that they wear every moment of every day. Behind that mask is something that this council cannot comprehend, a capacity for violence and destruction that makes the Varth look like children playing with toys. She turned back to face the assembly. The Varth Dominion was one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, she said. They had conquered dozens of species and held their empire for 5,000 years. They believed they could crush humanity through superior numbers and firepower. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the chamber. Humanity destroyed them in 6 months. The silence that followed was absolute. And here is the part that should terrify you, Valith continued. During that entire campaign, the humans were still holding back. They were still making choices, still following rules, still limiting themselves to targets that had participated in the attack on their colony. They did not strike at Vara civilians who had fled the Empire. They did not pursue enemies who had surrendered and been accepted by other species. She looked directly at the delegates who had called for military action against humanity. That was not total war, she said. That was controlled, directed violence aimed at a specific enemy. The humans chose to destroy the Varth Dominion, and they chose when to stop. Her voice rose as she reached the climax of her speech. But what happens when they stop choosing? She demanded. What happens when something pushes them past the point of reason, past the point of control, past the point where they care about limits or rules or consequences? What happens when humans stop smiling, stop shaking hands, stop pretending to be civilized? She spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire chamber. Nothing survives, she said. Not the Varth. Not this council. Not the Kethrani. Nothing. They will burn the galaxy to ash. And they will not stop until there is nothing left to burn. Valith lowered her arms and spoke her final words with deadly calm. You cannot contain them, she said. You cannot defeat them. You cannot reason with them once they have decided you are an enemy. The only thing you can do, the only thing any of us can do, is avoid giving them a reason to lose control. She pointed at the human delegation, where David Chun sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching her with that same gentle smile. Those people are not our enemies, she concluded. They are the most powerful allies we could ever hope to have, as long as we treat them with respect. They are smiling at us right now. They are offering us friendship and peace. I suggest we accept that offer. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembly one final time. Because I have studied them, she said. And this is my final warning as ambassador. If humanity ever truly loses control, if they ever stop smiling and start destroying, then nothing in this galaxy will survive their wrath. Nothing. She returned to her seat in silence. The council voted 3 hours later by an overwhelming majority. They accepted humanity's offer of peace and friendship, and across the chamber, the humans smiled. They shook hands with delegates from 100 different species. They spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit. They were warm and kind and perfectly civilized, and the galaxy smiled back. Because now they understood the truth that Ambassador Violeth had tried to teach them. The smiles were not a sign of weakness. The smiles were the only thing keeping everyone alive, and as long as the galaxy remembered that lesson. As long as they treated humanity with respect and friendship. As long as they never gave humans a reason to stop pretending, everything would be fine. Ambassador Valeth watched the humans work the room, building relationships and making friends. And she felt something she had not expected, hope, because maybe, just maybe, the monsters could become something better, as long as no one made them bare their teeth again.